A very good evening, one and all. Thank you very much for your company this evening. Now, welcome back, of course, to Reasoned UK. Make sure you do hit that subscribe button right now and join the conversation in the little chat box that we've got. And the what I'll be reading out will be responses to your comments and conversation that goes on in there. Thank you so much to those members of my Substack community, which has grown in number and in strength, that is joining this stream tonight. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Hang on a minute. That Darren Grimes fella back on Reasoned UK? Well, yes, it is, my friend. Surprise, surprise, surprise. The prodigal son returns. That is my Reasoned YouTube, I kind of point. Reasoned YouTube, 100,000 subscribers. Well, it's gone up and then some since then. Now, I get to you tonight having been grilled by Beth Rigby of Sly News. So I'm roaring and ready to go after that escapade. Now, she came at me over net zero, over defunding Durham Pride, saying that actually I don't think it's a priority for Durham's taxpayers, hard pressed as they are, stretched wallets that they have. So you can imagine how that went when I said all of those things. That'll apparently be out next week at some point. But I told them straight, I says, listen, if you at Sky News want Durham Pride, the pronoun parade, with identity politics and all the rest of it, well, guess what? You can fund it. You can fund it yourselves. They're owned by Comcast. They've got a penny or two in those coffers. But our taxpayers, they shouldn't be on the hook for it. And this is what I said to them, clear as day, I did. So, honestly, I can't actually countenance the orbit in which they fly in. But look, we had a long, lengthy discussion, stood up loud and proud for Reform UK and what we're doing in local government. And, well, let's see how they edit it, if you know what I mean. Now, welcome, 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 of course. Likes, shares, subscriptions, they all really matter. They keep channels like this alive in an age where the BBC is editing Trump speeches and calling it journalism. They edited it to make him look like he caused an act of violence. Where's their shiny new fake news verify team at, eh? That's what I want to know. Maybe start with your own sodden newsroom before you try and lecture every bugger else, eh? But that's why independent outlets like this one have to exist and have to thrive. Before we dive in, I should actually give a little shout out here. I want to pay tribute to the brilliant Chloe Dobbs, who has worked her socks off, keeping Reasoned going. It's been my baby, since lockdown, my baby, but she's raised it beautifully. She really has. Talented, she's capable, she's as beautiful as she is bright, and I'm intensely grateful to her for the work that she's been putting in to this channel. And I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of respect for her, actually, within the comment section. I can see some of your comments right now coming in thick and fast. Bolt says, thumbs up, people. Yep, thumbs up. It helps, my angels. It really helps. Now, it is, of course, some of you might be out tonight because it is, of course, bonfire night. And some of you will be round the twist because your dogs will be scared stiff, or your cats. You might be Mrs. Slocum looking after your pussy, or indeed your pooch. Who knows? I don't discriminate. But those that aren't out, thank you very much for your company. And I wonder if we can think about bonfire night for a second. Because if you're enjoying a health and safety approved fireworks, we need to remember what tonight's really about. I say health and safety fireworks. I remember my nana at the end of a street, where I'm from. At the end of a street, she used to be in charge of lighting the bonfire for her street. And the council clamped down on it eventually when I started growing up a little bit and told her she couldn't do it for health and safety reasons. Bore off. But anyway, If you're having a health and safety approved bonfire tonight, let's think about what tonight really is about. You know, the line, remember, remember the 5th of November with gunpowder, treason, and plot. Well, it marks the foiled attempt to blow up Parliament in 1605. And that poem, that little utterance that we do every year, is a warning that treason should never be forgotten and never be forgiven. And I think what you'll see in tonight's stories is a thread, a fine tapestry, a weave. And a few of you might say Sir Keir Starmer's government is doing a fine job of treachery by itself that we ought to remember too. You know, rolling back on tax pledges, letting mass migration run rampant, and waving criminals out of prison like they're at an airport lounge, waving them on. Cooey, just me, Sir Keir. How you doing? So let's have a little look at one of the effigies, the guise that's being constructed. Here it is in all its glory. Have a little look at this. So this is an 11-meter effigy.
Comfortable with. You've got a lot of kit, haven't you?
There's Starmer the Farmer Harmer on his badge. He's got digital ID on there with a picture of Guy Fawkes on the digital ID. He's got a list here, no tax increase, one in, one out, stuck up to Trump, build 15 mil houses, support small businesses. There it is in all its glory. Check staff rental permits, you know, little Rachel. She got a little shout out. Larry's food, Larry, of course, being the cat in number 10 Downing Street. It's extraordinary, is it not? But anyway, that's going to get lit on fire. And, you know, I think actually it matters. It matters that we talk about these things because ultimately, I think actually we ought to remember a little bit of treachery because I think actually there is a complete betrayal of the British public. And I don't think we should stand for it. I really don't. Now, my friends, tonight, look at that. I've paused on the perfect moment, haven't I? It looks like him completely. It looks completely. Now, I'm worried, actually, my friends, that far from bringing out 1605, we're actually bringing back the 1970s. And I'm sure some of you will remember the 1970s. I'm not being impertinent. I know that you are wise owls of the chat, and you'll remember the 1970s. You'll remember it better than I do, of course, being a 1993 whippersnapper. And I remain unscathed from that period. Although I dare say a lot of you remember the 1970s being a more united country and certainly a safer one. Now, we need to actually get one thing straight before we dive into the BBC's latest embarrassing bit of guff and propaganda. I, like many of you, you know, I've worked since I was 15 years old, but I'm feeling incredibly anxious about Rachel Reeves's new tax increases that have been widely reported in the press. She gave that press conference in which she suggested that actually these were very much on the cards. You know, the ones aimed at anyone earning over 46 grand, but also going for pensioners and all these other bits and bobs that they're trying to implement because that apparently is the new definition of being filthy rich. So, to counter that socialist raid on the middle learners, I've got a genius plan. I've got a genius plan. And I think we should all follow it. What I'm going to do is claim personal independence payments, otherwise known as PIP. And it's a form of benefit that'll tackle my crippling anxiety about Rachel Thieves' tax increases. Because that's a new ticket to the gravy train. And then I get to head straight down to the nearest dealership and claim a brand new BMW on the government's Motability scheme. Now, this is a scheme that you pay for through your taxes that she's putting up, and that's how this works. So I'm going to do it. Why not? Why not? That's the incentive structure that the liberal left have created in Britain today. And the history that Labour is all too keen for us to forget is that if Rachel Reeves goes through with raising the basic rate of income tax, she's going to be the first Chancellor to do it in 50 years. So it's a nuclear option, right? It's a nuclear option that hasn't been touched since 1975. Those taxes going up to fund the kind of schemes that I mentioned there, getting me a brand new BMW for my anxiety issues. Now, the Chancellor back then was the one and only Dennis Healey of the Labour Party, a very different Labour beast to the one we see today. Now, the problem was that Healey was facing an economic meltdown driven by runaway inflation and unemployment. Now, his response was to raise the basic rate from 33% to 35%. And the outcome, well, the outcome was pre-Maggie. Did it fix the economy? Absolutely not. By 1979, there was, of course, the winter of discontent with the 3-day working week. You could only have the lecky on when the government mandated it. It was just another step on the road to national humiliation. There was massive public spending cuts dictated by the IMF, that is the International Monetary Fund, and eventually, of course, as I say, that winter of discontent itself. So this wasn't just a few strikes, right? This was the entire country ground to a halt by trade unions resisting wage caps imposed by a failing Labour government. It was the absolute total collapse of government authority. You know, you'll remember it. Widespread disruptive strikes by lorry drivers, the dead not being buried, railway workers, public sector workers. Coincidence much? The images, piles of rubbish on the streets, grave diggers, as I say, on strike. You had the dead laying there unburied. The lights were always going out. Inflation was out of control, hitting real living standards. So Healy's tax hike was part of the same desperate, big state, failed policy package that led to that national post-war humiliation. It was the final straw that convinced the nation that Labour and the union barons couldn't be trusted to run a piddle up in a brewery, let alone the country. And they gave Mrs. Thatcher a chance. To me, my friends, the parallel is crystal clear. We've got a Labour Chancellor facing a massive budget hole, which they themselves helped dig, and they're considering breaking a 50-year-old taboo. The last time, as I say, the government did this, a Labour government did this, the country was sinking fast. Now that's the background to this budget, isn't it? This is the same party that wants to take more of your money to fund a benefit system that hands out taxpayer-subsidied luxury BMWs. Can you afford a BMW? I haven't got one on the drive. I cannot afford one. Well, I cannot drive yet, but I will be soon. I promise, I promise, I promise. Don't judge. They're handing them out to people who complain about anxiety and all these other things and get personal independence payments. Have a watch of what the BBC actually think is the real scandal here. What I've got on screen there, by the way, is British attitudes towards benefit claimants, and they're hardening. This shows that actually a 52% see and view the welfare state as being far too lax, far too easy to obtain benefits. Have a listen. The BBC put together a package on the Motability scandal, which is a government-funded scheme, and this was the BBC puff piece that they put out.
A Treasury source has told the BBC that the Chancellor feels the scheme has lost focus. A scheme intended to provide essential mobility, now critics say providing too many luxury cars and cars without any adaptations for the disabled. On the Motability website are a number of cars identified by the Treasury as luxury models, available at a lower price than normal. But Farah Black doesn't agree. She made an advance payment to cover the additional cost of her luxury car and feels the criticism targets the disabled community.
Why should it not be allowed? Personally, prior to my accident and amputations, I was a petrol head. Why can I not continue to be? I wasn't just looking at a fancy car. I was looking at how safe it would be for me, and my car keeps me safe.
The Treasury are adamant that any changes will be about making public money go further and ensuring those who need to access the scheme are able to do so. But people like Farah, who say the current scheme is working well, have urged the Chancellor to pump the brakes. Patrick Fee, BBC Newsline.
Now, look, I'm not saying that everybody that's taking advantage of the Motability scheme is driving around in a BMW like that woman clearly is, but she, has been made a living out of advocacy for the disabled. And I would argue that actually far too many people who are taking advantage of this scheme simply aren't disabled. They said there in that piece, despite the framing of the actual piece itself, she says, I was a petrol head. Why can't I drive a luxury BMW? Well, because the taxpayer doesn't have a pot to piddle in. We are being squeezed to a pulp. Debt to GDP is at 100%. That means that the amount of money that we generate, we are now in debt to that full amount. We've got no money left to actually put into the coffers additionally. That's why Rachel Reeves is squeezing with every last vestige that she has in her socialist clutches to actually drag more money out of you, even going after income tax to try and hit pensioners. So, look, I don't think that everyone has a right to a BMW. I don't. I'm afraid some people will say I'm heartless. I don't. While working families, right, are taxed to the hilt, we're funding BMWs for benefit claimants. So I would argue that the charge of law and order, they can't even remember themselves what actually duty and sacrifice looks like anymore. And that's leading to a whole host of issues. In this here, you can see here that the number of economically inactive people due to long-term sickness in the United Kingdom has actually gone up absolutely hugely. And Labour's benefit reforms never came to fruition. They never brought them in. It never happened. They relented. They went back. They reverse ferreted like a rat up a drain pipe. And we haven't had that brought into full view. But the reason I mention, and that of course is the welfare, showing that the British people are growing in their discontent with the benefit system. But that, I think, leads us on. You talk about duty, right? You talk about sacrifice. You talk about how we can't be everything to everyone, including asylum seekers. The benefits bill in that regard, the asylum bill has gone up and up and up. Asylum seekers, illegal migrants, whatever you want to call them. People that shouldn't be here, that's what I'd call them. But we talk about, right, this week in particular, we talk about duty and sacrifice. I'm afraid that if some people are going to have to sacrifice some of those benefits that they're getting at the minute. But maybe we should look a lot across to the Labour front bench, in which David Lammy, the man actually tasked with being Britain's deputy prime minister, the man who thought Henry VII came after Henry VIII, is running a system that's releasing foreign rapists and sex offenders by mistake, right? And he couldn't even remember his poppy at Prime Minister's questions. Look at him there. I would assume that Bridget Phillipson, who was sat next to him, she's the education secretary, and she lost the deputy leadership election for the Labour Party, handed her poppy over to him, realising that he was populous, whilst he was stood there lecturing the country on values. And suddenly it was pinned on his person. Well, the poppy isn't a prop. You wear it because you remember those who gave everything to this country. And this lot, they only remember when the cameras actually notice. And I find that absolutely outrageous. I find it outrageous in many respects because actually veterans and homelessness, it's an issue in this country. Yet we can house those who come here with absolutely no right to be here whatsoever. And he stands there and lectures all of us about how, we need to dial down the rhetoric and all these other things. He's a total charlatan. As Robert says, Robert says migrants get millions. And we get nothing. I think that's right. I do. I think that's right. So while Lammy's busy fixing his optics, putting his poppy on himself, the prisons under his watch are they're fixing their doors wide open by the seams of things. Wide, wide open. Because Calamity Lammy, well, dun 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 dun. That's what it's like. It's like Mission Impossible, but only it's not impossible. Barely 2 weeks ago, the Epping migrant, that is Hadush Kabatu, was accidentally released. Now, this was a man who attacked a 14-year-old girl, and instead of punishment, the government handed him 500 quid of your money and told him to stop appealing, get yourself away on your bike. That was after releasing him from prison accidentally. Now, his victim's family said they cried because the man who violated their child got paid for doing it. Now, Lammy's department prioritised the offender's paperwork over the victim's dignity. And then, of course, we had the man who was deported from the UK in Labour's in-out scheme with France, in which they take hundreds of millions of your money, and apparently we deport one person back and they stop the boats. Well, they haven't sodden well to stop the boats. And before any Labour clever sod tries to suggest that actually the boats there hasn't been a crossing for the last 2 weeks, yeah, there's also been several storms, right? More storms than Rachel Reeves's tax affairs. So just as actually the outrage managed to ferment, they have deported that in-out migrant. He's gone. Will he come back? Who knows? He's done it before. He might do it again. Do the hokey cokey, in, out, collect your benefits. That's what it's like. That's what it's like. We are a joke nation. So the outrage fades with each of those cases, right? But then today we find another. This is Ibrahim Kadur Sharif. Accidentally, I don't know about you, are you getting tired of accidents? I certainly bloody well am. Accidentally released from HMP Wandsworth at His Majesty's pleasure in Wandsworth in London. He was convicted of indecent exposure and he should have been deported 5 years ago. Lammy stood at the dispatch box today and he boasted about introducing the toughest checks ever. Tough. They waited 6 days to tell the police that he was gone. This isn't human error. This is Labour ministerial failure and a systemic rot that's taken place in this country. And when he was challenged about this in the House of Commons, he hid behind process, bleating about not preempting police statements. And the translation is he didn't want to admit it. The arrogance, the shouting, get a grip, man, while the system he runs is losing sex offenders. He even blamed the previous government, but the truth is simple. Accidental releases have more than doubled under Labour from 115 to 266. This is the record of this Labour government. And then over at the Home Office, Shabana Mahmood running her own circus, the in, out, take it all about. Well, he got a free holiday at our expense. He had biometrics, he had lawyers, he had flights. We pay for all of it. Our borders aren't guarded. They're simply a revolving door. And this leads me on to a really quite distressing set of affairs, where a whistleblower interviewed by the phenomenal journalist Alison Pearson. She was, this woman, let's call her Nikki, an asylum caseworker. And she says that she fears a man that she was forced to grant asylum to will one day rape or murder a young girl. Now, this is what people are being told. And she says that actually, even if that's the case, they still get granted asylum to stay here. And why is that? Well, it's the system's insanity. She's seen men switch identities like outfits. They go from, I'm a political prisoner, to I'm a Christian convert, to all of a sudden I'm more gay than Alan Carr, and a refugee. If you send me back home, I'll be gay bashed, I'll be murdered. If I go back home, I'll be killed for my Christianity. If I go back home, I'll be oppressed by the state. Anything to drag these cases out for years and years and years until the Home Office just says, fine, stay here, drag it all out, forget about it, off it pops. And I was contacted by my own whistleblower here in County Durham. I was. And I was told that when migrants who are here put up at your expense in homes that we need, that actually when they're brought in and asked to appear at a police station, if they abscond from said police station, well, that's it. The police just hope that they'll come back by committing another crime, but they go off into the underground where they're, off to do whatever the hell they want, whether it be indecent exposure, whether it be the black economy. So this is what Lammy's incompetence and Mahmood's revolving door look like on your high street. This is what this whistleblower is warning of. That actually the slew, the litany, the constant attrition against us as a people, hoping that we become so desensitized to every sick and twisted migrant story that we simply become so sick and tired of it that we stop caring. This is what they want to happen. But we mustn't. And this is what's happening on our high streets, by the way. Have a watch of this. This is a man called Searchy. And Searchy is a refused asylum seeker. But he doesn't look oh so refused to me. Does he look like that to you?
This is Top Store, a high street mini-mart in Crewe. Inside are undercover journalist, posing as an asylum seeker. He's here to meet this man, Searchy. He's Kurdish and says his asylum claim has been refused.
Oh, we learned English then, since 2022.
But somehow, he says he owns this mini-mart and now wants to sell. £18,000 cash out of sight of authorities. A sale off the books no documents. And how does Searchy deal with utility bills? And all this is driven by organised crime, the sale of counterfeit and smuggled illegal cigarettes. And this is where he hides them, an untaxed stash car. And here are some of those paying customers, teenagers.
Hello. Hi. How are you?
As Searchy admitted, he sold vapes to children. Well, after months of investigating high street mini-marts, we returned to Top Storing crew.
The illegal cigarettes.
At the back of the mini-mart, the stash car.
Just watch this.
And at the front of the mini-mart,
Searchy. BBC News.
we found Searchy.
You're an asylum seeker with no right to work. Why are you running a mini-mart? You're selling illegal cigarettes from Top Store.
No, bro, I have a paper, I have everything.
That's your paper? See your paper?
Yes.
We see your paperwork?
Yes, I have papers.
Here's your paper. This is your mini-mart. You've sold vapes to children.
No, bro, no.
Searchy denied any wrongdoing.
No, bro, no, you lie.
He said he had the paperwork proving he had the right to work.
There we are. That's going on in our high streets. And you all know this is happening, right? You look down your high streets, you see a slew of Turkish barbers, you see these vape shops. And you know, on your dead high streets, as I know with mine, that actually there's no way that they can be making a viable sum of money to actually allow them to stay in business and operation. I'll be accused of being conspiratorial and all the rest of it. And we're not. So this man in this video, Mr. Searchy, was refused asylum. He was running a shop for cash up front, and he was selling it off the books for £18,000. No accountant, no tax, no documents, whilst honest shopkeepers on your high streets pay VAT, they pay their national insurance that's gone up, and business rates. The criminal cartel is simply stood there laughing in their faces as they risk the closure of their own businesses. Apparently this fella was stealing electricity with a hidden switch, selling smuggled untaxed cigarettes, and the final insult, of course, selling cigarettes, selling vapes to 12-year-old children. This isn't a sob story. We shouldn't feel sorry for this grifting chancer. This is organised crime operating with government-issued immunity. And we go back to that whistleblower story. This same whistleblower was disciplined for refusing an Afghan man repeatedly arrested for indecent exposure in a children's play area. She was told that she ought to grant his claim because Afghanistan is a high grant country. So the policy itself protects predators over children. And I know this for a fact. Local authorities are still being asked to accept Afghan applications wholesale, to take them in, because they say they helped us during the war. Well, I put it to you, my friends, I'm not an expert in that particular war. But I will tell you this. I can bet you my bottom dollar that if anyone was still in Afghanistan that had helped the British or American forces in that war, they would be dead. The Taliban would have killed them. They wouldn't still be lingering about waiting for the British to bail them out. They would be gone. Anyone that didn't get out when Biden unceremoniously pulled the troops out in this really botched way, anyone still there then, I think would be long gone. So I cannot for the life of me understand why it is that our government doesn't get that we're still being told that we ought to fund this, that we ought to be on side in a kind and compassionate way. to actually deal with these issues. The caseworkers in these examples are under pressure to actually hit quotas. They get told they need to make 5 or 6 decisions a week, and these are hefty dossiers and case studies. So they take the easy route. They want an easy life, a simple life. Rubber stamp claim, right? That's how dangerous men end up on our streets. It's targets over truth. It's numbers over safety. And I posted on my X account yesterday a case of a man who was caught in Cardiff, and he was a Syrian man. And he committed a violent sexual assault and strangulation in which he pinned a girl up by her neck, by her throat. And he got a 37-month sentence in prison. Lucy Connolly, for a tweet, got 31 months in prison. But you strangle and sexually assault a girl leaving a nightclub, vulnerable, alone, walking under a tunnel on her way home, and you get 37 months. I think we need to deport people like that. We need to boot out this government alongside of it. We can't go on like this. We simply can't. So if you pull the 2 stories that I've discussed there together, you're taxed to the ground to fund welfare cars and the work shy. And I'm afraid some of them are. I'm not saying everybody. No, my late auntie had spina bifida. She couldn't work. She was totally unable to actually, God bless her, God love her, to do anything. I'm not suggesting for a second that people like her shouldn't receive taxpayer support. But when you're saying you've got anxiety, when you're saying, oh, well, I need a BMW, I used to be a petrol head, well, tough luck, I'm afraid. That's the British taxpayer can't afford to give everyone that wants one a BMW. The British taxpayer can't afford to give everyone that wants to come here from the world's poor and the third world that want to do all sorts to women and girls to come here either. We've got to get real on this. Welfare cars, foreign criminals getting payouts, the Justice Secretary actually losing sex offenders, the Home Office running a revolving door, caseworkers punished for protecting kids. This isn't compassion. This is chaos. It's not governance. It's betrayal. I go back to Guy Fawkes. Treachery. So the call to arms here has to be what has to happen. Lammy, well, he ought never have been in the upper echelons of government. Accountability ought to start at the top. If Sir Keir Starmer had anything about him, he would tell people like Whammy Lammy where the door is. And apart from, all these people, half of the Conservative Party, all of the Labour Party, they say, we can't exit the ECHR. Britain will be a human rights basket case if we don't keep the ECHR. We need those European judges to keep us on the straight and narrow. We don't know what to do on our own. Britain didn't invent human rights and the rights of the freeborn. John Lilburn never existed. A man from Sunderland. See, I like Sunderland sometimes. I'm joking, I love Sunderland. But we don't need the ECHR. We need to stop allowing lawyers hide behind human rights loopholes. We need to stop telling people in the Home Office that if they don't rubber stamp enough, they won't meet their quotas. End those quotas. We need safety before stats. I don't give a rat's arse about your penchant for compassion. The gravy train has to be stopped. Our borders have to be secured. Our money has to be respected. So if you, like me, are sick of being treated like a mug funding it all and hearing that you're going to be squeezed even further, not unlike the orange that I've got stuffed in my drink, well, say so below. Because I think actually the decent majority of this country deserves its voice back. The people of this country deserve their country back. The people of this country deserve governance that actually respects them. And that's why I think actually this is a relevant conversation to the Guy Fawkes experience of tonight. I do. And before anyone clips this up and says Darren Grimes is saying that we need to march underneath the Palace of Westminster and blow it sky high. No, I'm not bloody well saying that. It's called a metaphor, right? Get a grip. Grow up. What I am saying is that the political class are at risk of repeating the same mistakes back then of treachery. I do see it as treachery. I see it as them standing resolutely against the British public. That's what I'm saying to you, my friends. And before I get to some of your comments, in fact, I'll get to some now. Oh, not for you to know. I nearly said to now. To me, to you. Do you remember the Chuckle Brothers? Probably not. But, well, not Godot says that actually Guy Fawkes was right. Look, I wouldn't go that far. I don't know. I think we've got to win at the ballot box. We really do. But not for you to know says based. Adam says, I'm here purely because of Chloe. I've fallen in love with her. Adam, you and me both. She is a beautiful girl. Beautiful girl. Not Godot says, way up Poppy with pride. I couldn't agree more. And Dave says we need severe consequences for officials who allow criminals in this country. But Dave, the problem is that actually the officials, like this woman here, in this expose by Alison Pearson, they're being told that this is what they've got to do. I don't blame them, actually. I blame the sackless government that is telling them that they are mandated to do this. They're the ones I blame. Ben says it's every man's responsibility to create a good life for him and his family. In today's world, that means creating online business and moving your family to a safe country. Ben, I hope not. I hope you're wrong. I hope we can turn this around. I really, really do. We've got to turn this around. We've got no choice. Britain is drinking in Last Chance Saloon. What's the difference between them released now? Lord Veteran says hot prisons or holiday camps. Well, actually, that's a good point because I don't know if you saw, but the guy who threatened to kill Nigel Farage in prison, he's been releasing videos doing the same thing. This pop, doing that in prisons, smartphones on video. So I think they are actually. Not for you to know says poppies are too good for Labour MPs. I don't know if you remember this, but Keir Starmer got into hot water not too long ago, a few years, in which actually he had his poppy on for one video, and then later in the day for another video, when speaking to the Muslim community, he took his poppy off. Well, there are 2 points there. One, what does that say about Keir Starmer's reverence for our war dead? Does he really care about them? And secondly, what's he trying to say about the Muslim community? Is he trying to suggest that they don't care about Britain's war dead? If so, that's problematic in and of itself. So maybe you have a point, I should say. Lord Veteran says, this drives me mad, going back to our disabled story, the mobility scheme. I'm disabled. I use that money to pay for my own car. It's a Citroen. And yeah, look, I don't, I'm totally sympathetic to the disabled. But I do think that if you are someone that looks like a pampered pooch getting into a BMW, that actually the states shouldn't be subsidising your BMW. I'm sorry. Michelle is here. Hello, Michelle. Victoria says a penny for the guy. She wants to give a penny to the guy. And Chill Out Time says, how did the Beth Rigby go today, Dazza? Well, look, it was an interesting affair. You know, there was a lot going on, a lot of questions. It went on a lot longer than anticipated. So we'll see how they edit it. Well, they could do a BBC hatchet job. Did you see that? Donald Trump being told to say something that he actually didn't say on one of the BBC's flagship shows. Well, yeah, and Truth Seeker says, Chloe has done amazing work with this channel. I agree. I agree. She's done marvellous work with my baby. She's raised it well. She is one brave soul. We owe her a lot. I agree. I agree. I agree. And someone says to Grumpy Grandad, who is a big, 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 big love of mine, we will turn it around. We have to. We have no other choice. I agree with that. I agree completely. Now that leads me on to this. Now this story, you'll have seen it. I'm sure you'll have seen it. It's about my party. You know it well. The Reform Party. Well, schools have compared reform, and I get contacted actually by, and I have for many years, contacted by people who are told that their child's school is an indoctrination camp, whether it be visiting all sorts of religions and all the rest of it for uh, inclusivity lessons, or being told that political parties that their parents might well vote for are somewhere to the right of Attila the Hun. What we have here are this is an academy, an example of an academy actually claiming that the Reform Party is tantamount to fascism. Now, the message here is pretty simple, and we need to call it what it is. It's indoctrination. It's a taxpayer-funded smear campaign against millions of decent people who simply want their country back. The message to children is also as simple. It says, if you love your flag, if you love your nation, if you love what it stood for and continues to stand for, what it stood for back when my grandfather was fighting in the Korean War under the Durham Light Infantry, symbol of freedom, a symbol of liberty, a symbol of actually the British way of doing things, which was sought all over the world. You love that flag. Well, you're suspect. If you question mass migration, well, you're far right. If you read a paper that doesn't worship Starmer, talk about vegan living, talk about, I don't know, quinoa, well, you're basically Hitler. And teachers have been told, or are telling their children, that the St. George's flag, England's flag, is a provocative symbol used by far-right groups. That's what we've been reduced to. Now, these were year 10s, 14 and 15-year-old, being told to be ashamed of the cross of St. George. Going back to Shakespeare, you know, for Harry and St. George, that has stirred on generations of Englishmen. Englishmen that we are told are reduced to nothing, that don't amount to anything other than far-right politics. If this isn't an act of cultural vandalism and propaganda, then I don't know what is. This is no better than Chairman Mao's Little Red Book. You know, communism is the way, communism is all there is. And what's truly extreme isn't the policies of reform. It's the left's warped obsession with controlling what young Britons think. And it's not lost on me, my friends, that this comes at a time in which our young people are being given the vote by the Labour Party. Could it be that the Labour-loving teaching class actually want our children to vote a certain way? They tell our children to distrust their parents. They tell our children to distrust their newspapers, their patriotism, all while pretending to fight misinformation. Well, they're doing about as good a job as that as the BBC. This is the same establishment that can't define a woman, God help kids in a classroom, now lecturing teenagers on extremism. It isn't education. It's ideological grooming. That's what it is. That's what it is. So I'm worried about it. And I think actually, ultimately, we are on the hook for all of it. You know, what do we have in this country? What is it that we've spoken about tonight? The Justice Secretary can't keep offenders locked up. The Home Office can't keep criminals out. Schools can't keep politics out of the damn classroom. BMWs for those on personal independence payments. People in BBC Question Time audiences talking about how terrible it is that Reform wants to cut disability payments for those who are suffering from anxiety. Well, I'm suffering anxiety from Rachel Reeves's tax increases. I don't think anyone thinks it would be proportionate for me to claim a BMW off the back of that, do you? You pay for all of this. You pay for the migrants. You pay for the mistakes. You pay for the Marxism. And you're expected to smile while they call you a fascist or criticise you for flying your own flag. Fascist. The truth is simple. Much simpler than their spin. The decent, patriotic majority of this country are not far right. We're just right. We're right on it all. Right to demand borders. Right to defend our culture. Right to be proud of the country that our grandparents and ancestors before them built. That's what we're right about. And you, my friends, are wrong. You are treacherous. You are selling our country down the Swanee. We're in Last Chance Saloon. And the only hope, in my view, the only hope is a Reform UK government coming in and giving this nation a good hard kick up the backside. I really, really strongly believe that. If you agree, leave a comment. Because they can't cancel common sense, ultimately, you know, they could put me in the rack. A bit like Guy Fawkes. I will not be signing my own signature. Put me in the rack. We can't afford to do this. You know, I think about all of, and I will this week, I will especially reflect on the sacrifice of our ancestors, not even just in war, as important as that is to remember, but those who brought up children who were statistically likely to die in childbirth, those who went down the mines, those who actually before that went through so very much in the name of building up this rich inheritance that we ruin and exploit today and take for granted. I say we, it's not you and I, but we have to do the job of convincing people that they can't do a Caerphilly by-election and actually allow the left to form together a coalition to actually keep Reform out of government. Because the real extremists aren't in Reform. They're in teacher staff rooms. They're in trade unions. They're in the quangos. They're in parts of the state. They're trying to raise a generation that apologises for its own country whilst we pay them to do it. And the mood is shifting. I mentioned that Caerphilly by-election. The mood is shifting. The welfare scrounging, the mass migration, the woke schooling, the public has had enough. Caerphilly showed that the left will huddle together to block Reform, but the tide is turning. By the general election, when the economy tanks, and I don't say this with any form of celebration, I dread that. People will struggle, and it'll be councils like mine that have to pick up the slack. And we're already facing teetering on the edge. But the tide is turning. And by the general election, when you know, we have hit rock bottom. I think the British public will realise that reform is the only ticket out of Last Chance Saloon. It's somewhere we've been drinking in since 1997. We need to undo all that Blairism did to our country, root out that rot. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. And when you wear your poppy this weekend, unlike Whammy Lammy, remember what it is that people fought for. They fought for a free, proud, self-respecting, self-governing nation. And that's still worth fighting for today. See what some of the comments are. Michael says that the congestion charge has been brought back into Oxford. They're determined to turn it into a 12-minute city. You know what, Michael? There is only one thing that I think a man should be able to be excused for being able to complete it in 12 minutes. I'll let you discuss and guess what that is. I don't wish to sully this channel's great name. Ian says, believe me, premium cars like BMW and Mercedes are available on the mobility scheme. It's time the government published the figures. Half of all new cars are registered on the mobility scheme. Ian, you're right. This has become a £4 billion industry. £4 billion. We want to help those that need help, the genuinely disabled. But we cannot be funding luxury motors for those who actually are simply not in absolute need to be in receipt of them. Truth Seeker says, digital ID, my ass. Yeah, well, they want to bring that in. They want to control us. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Little Grimesy won't be allowed to get on the internet. Paul says, good to see you back on Alive, Mr. Grimes. Hope you and the team are well and glad to see Labour are destroying themselves daily. And we are destroying them daily. I promise you that. That's why they hate me. Not Godot says, stop importing people that hate you. It's a good point. Fabulicious says, Darren, when you did that interview tonight, he or she is talking about the Sky News interview. I hope you taped it. Don't trust them to edit it. Well, they will have you saying they want to let more boats in. I can assure you I didn't bloody well say that. I want to say this now before they release it. But look, I've got no, it is what it is. I think we know that the media is biased towards reform. They'll do what they can. Robin says the fireworks are going off tonight in Darlington, and I imagine the fireworks will go off in Darlington in May of next year at the local elections. Not for you to know, says Darren. Are you coming back? Well, it depends if people want me back, Let's see. I do my Substack show on my Substack, obviously, on a Sunday, but I thought this would be a good midweek segue. Do you not think? Good little show. Michael's worried. So much pent-up anger. When it explodes, God help us. I worry about that. Tony says 100%, Darren. Tony, thank you for the support. Mr. Majak, I think this might be Grumpy Grandad, says, as a veteran, what's happening to our nation is everything I swore to defend my nation from. It does not sit right with me. I can see civil war if this continues. And Elon Musk was widely ridiculed for saying that. But I think actually when trust in democracy is fundamentally broken, when you vote for parties that don't deliver what they pledge to deliver time and again, you lose trust, you lose faith in the ballot box. You see the ballot box is fundamentally broken. And then what do? Well, you reach for other tools. And once you reach for other tools outside of the democratic process, then I'm afraid you do see a breakdown in societal cohesion. And it does lead to events like that. You don't have to be the biggest strategist in the MOD to foresee that bad boy coming down the pipeline. That's why reform is the necessary antidote to being able to actually figure this out. Right, my friends, it is 9 o'clock and I have a lot to do tomorrow. I will love you and leave you at this juncture. But as I say, don't forget your poppies like David Lammy. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. You know, remember, unlike Whammy Lammy, the people that fought, you know, the people that fought for a free, proud, self-respecting nation, one that's still worth fighting for. I'll be back next week, but before then, you can find me on Substack at www.darrengrimes.com for exclusive updates. And please, if you believe in what Recent is building, consider supporting the channel. You know, it's a small channel, which it doesn't have big backers. You need to actually support it if you want it to stay. So consider supporting it, sharing, all the rest of it. It keeps us going. It rewards the brilliant Chloe Dobbs for the graft that she's put in over these months and years. Behind the scenes, getting Chloe in was a brilliant decision, if I do say so myself. Our ancestors, you know, they did. They built this country. They built it with courage. They built it with conviction. Now it's our turn to restore it to that greatness. There are chinks of light at the end of the tunnel for our beautiful nation. And together, my friends, we'll make them shine once more. We have to. We have to. I will not rest until actually people like my granddad are able to look down from up there in the sky and say, look, they didn't give up on us. And we must never, ever give up on them. Good night and God bless.